Hi, BookTube. Welcome to another nonfiction review. Today's book is out of print, and really, I ought to have read it when I purchased it and not 25 years later. Nevertheless, I did gain a lot from reading it, and I still think it would make a good introductory text to the history of feminism in the United Kingdom. Today we're reviewing Hyenas in Petticoats, a look at 20 years of feminism by Angela Neustatter, published in 1989, 250 pages long, and as you can see, in my lovely table where I normally show you the prices on Amazon, Amazon do not sell it. It is not sold new anywhere at all. You can buy some secondhand copies online. Yes, eBay was where I had to go in the end, and I did find one for just £3.21. That was the cheapest, but there were a few others if you are interested in picking this up. And of course, I read this as part of my winning titles TBR. This is book number 10 of 18, which is fantastic. We're getting through that TBR list. My copy, which you can see I've been holding here, there it is. It's got that lovely plastic covering on the hardcover edition, which suggests it was a library book. And in fact, if you do look inside, I can show you the stamp here. This was Summerhill, Birmingham Public Libraries. And also you can see there is the barcode and the discard stamp. So that was, I must have picked it up in a shop that received its stock from Birmingham Libraries, but I held on to it for 25 years and did not read it, which is a shame because when this was published in 1989, it was a retrospective looking back on the first 20 years of feminism. And it probably would have been a good idea for me to read it when I bought it, which would have been the late 90s, I think, and therefore perfectly, it still would have been recent history and probably good for me to know, but I didn't. The author, Angela Neustatter, was born in 1942. She went to Summerhill School in Leiston in Suffolk. That's a special school, and there will be links down in my description box to the school website. It's a very unusual school. It had no structures, no classroom timetable. The children participated in an absolute democracy with their staff to decide what they would learn and when, and it was very free. It's difficult for me to describe because I never attended an institution like it, but it's interesting that it turned out a number of well-known creative people subsequently. And then she went on to study at the University of Amsterdam, and she became known for works of journalism that dealt with feminist issues. In 1987, her first publication, Mixed Feelings, Experience of Abortion. And you'll also see in the description box that on LinkedIn, she still considers herself a self-employed journalist and author, even though, of course, she's now in her 80s. Angela has written articles for all the UK broadsheet newspapers and multiple glossy magazines. She's been the editor of Young Minds magazine, which focused on the mental well-being of young people. And as you might expect for someone who's racked up that much experience, Angela is currently working on her memoirs. I was personally very pleased with the book's structure. It had 14-point font, very large font, single-spaced text, yes, with little white space between the lines, but good white space in the surrounding margins. And the writing is journalistic, so imagine feature-length magazine articles. That's really what each chapter is. And there are 10 chapters, so they average about 25 pages, but there's a lot of blank pages between there as well. And also, if you'll see down in the resources section, there are these beautiful illustrations, which I'm going to put up on screen right now, a couple of examples by Maggie Ling. And they're clearly humorous, looking at the situation for life as a woman in the 1960s and 1970s. Actually, by the way, the drawing that you're looking at now, the added pencil drawing there is not mine. It was added to this page sometime before I acquired the book by an unknown reader, but it made the cartoon even funnier. I'll give a little summary of what's in each chapter. Chapter 1 is called Laying the Roots, 1968 to 1970, but it goes back before 68. It's looking at the early to mid-60s when, in the United Kingdom and in America, there was no term feminism, there was no concept of a movement, but there were women who were meeting informally in small groups to talk about their frustrations, about being confined to their roles as full-time mother and full-time homemaker, because after the Second World War, particularly in the UK, there was great social pressure on women to leave the workforce where they had been during the Second World War to make up for the lost men who were sent over to fight. And they were expected to get back into the home, raise children, keep the home, and make it a pleasant place for their husbands to come back to after work, those husbands who had been out fighting. But this was causing building frustration, particularly for any women who had any amount of education, that it curtailed their the use of that potential once they were stuck at home. And of course, they were responding to a seminal work that came out in 1962 by the writer Betty Friedan. And this is my 1964 paperback copy of The Feminine Mystique, describing this very sense of frustration, of being trapped, of not using the intellectual potential and leadership potential by just carrying out the roles of full-time mother and full-time housekeeper. So chapter 1 just talks about how things got started before there was enough action for it to start being called a movement. And of course, that's what chapter 2 covers, which is called Britain's Most Dangerous Revolutionaries, 1970s and 1980s. And of course, then it talks about how, as the movement grew, as it began to try to do things politically, that's when it needs a name. The mass media will give it a name, and feminism was a term that came from the mass media. And what was most interesting to me was when Angela talked about the relationship between the women's movement and the mass media. And this book helped me understand also when and how the separatist movement began as a faction within feminism. That is, certain women within the early feminist movements believed that the only solution that would truly work for women, that would truly liberate them from the constrictions that they were under, is if they stopped associating with men at all. If you had an all-female society. And you couldn't ask for a better piece of information if you were needing an attention-getting headline. And of course, it's that separatism that has kind of, even though it still remains a faction within feminism, it's debatable to what degree it influences different decisions. And it's also debatable whether it truly identifies feminism or not. But the problem is that even in a lot of women's minds, it sits there and stands out and has in some ways perhaps become a bit of a barrier to fully engaging with feminism in some cases. And chapter 3 goes on to deal with that. It's called Sexuality and Schism, Sex and Politics. The separatist movement within feminism put forward that the politics of heterosexual relationships would always be anti-feminist. They couldn't be changed in any way. Heterosexuality was essentially patriarchal. And this was where the rift began, where you had women who were in heterosexual relationships already, or wished to be in one, did not wish to have to forego them in order to be a feminist. And so it was interesting to learn about that initial tension, which was taking place in the early 1980s. I think Neustatter was very fair-handed. On the one hand, she acknowledges the alienation of some women from men because of their personal experiences that they'd had in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and how the image of the man-hating feminist might have been brilliant material for tabloid newspapers and office jokes. But on the other hand, if not for that radicalism and the attention that it got, it may be that we wouldn't have had some of the political changes that indeed did go through for all women. And chapter 5 covers a contentious issue, which is still contentious, which is it in the spirit of feminism to dress in the way women do? The message of fashion versus the message of feminism, the debates about whether clothing or makeup, because adornment is fun and creative and confidence building, whether they're good, and yet at the same time, fashion is a kind of prison for women. You know that a look defines you. And so all you really get to decide is which look do you want to be defined by? To choose not to cooperate, as some women did in the 80s, to forego anything that looked like women's clothing or women's hairstyles, no jewelry, no makeup. Yes, it was a look, but it was a look that created misunderstanding. It was a look that in the mass media became associated with separatism, man-hating, and lesbianism, whether the woman concerned felt that way or didn't. I'm reading here from page 103 to underline the point. Many women could see no alternative to taking a rigid stance. Feminists surveying the range of clothes available to them very soon found how thoroughly the women's dress market has been colonized by the fashion industry. In the hunt for clothes which could not be interpreted as sexual packaging, and which would also allow them mobility, comfort, and seriousness afforded to men by their dress, women had to search hard. The solution was found in shops stocking work clothes, such as donkey jackets, dungarees, non-style jeans, basic men's shirts and t-shirts. Doc Marten boots was another item, and although by no means all feminists adopted them, those who did inspired cartoons up and down the country, lampooning them as women's libbers and deeming them man-haters on the basis of their appearance. And chapters 6 through 8 talk about changes to the way women were regarded and included in the theatre and visual arts, in newspaper and television journalism, and in the workplace in general. In fact, chapter 8, Some Are More Equal Than Others, goes through step by step the legislation which was introduced in the UK to bring about equal pay for equal work. Those 3 chapters are just brilliant for covering what happened, who did it, and what they achieved. And what I liked about the way Neustatter chose to end this book, while she was putting together the material, she sent out an advertisement, I believe through several glossy magazines and newspapers, and asked women to write in letters and talk about what feminism meant to them. Had it done anything for them? Had it not? And to elaborate. And so what you see in the chapter is a mixture of all these letters being quoted, and you get the full spectrum of women's responses to what has happened. So you had women who were happy with where society had got to. There were some who were frustrated that 20 years hadn't achieved as much as they hoped it would. And there were some who were frustrated because they liked some or all of the traditional roles given to women. Maybe they'd already sacrificed a lot of their time and ambitions to fulfill those roles. And they were worried that what feminism would discredit all the effort that they had put in. And so it was really interesting to see that reaction in the late 80s. And I think you could probably take a similar sampling of reactions. And it'd be interesting to see in what way they were the same now and in what way they differ. So in spite the fact that I took 25 years to finally get round to reading this book, and its history is old, and perhaps it would have been better if I'd done, I don't know if any of you remember, but back when I started my Winning Titles TBR, I was going to read this book much earlier, and I put it to one side. I felt a little disappointed with myself that I'd left it so long to pick up the book, because I thought, I should have read this in the 90s. That would have been the better time. It would have been a book for me and my time, and now it's somewhere else. But nevertheless, I still got 2 benefits from reading the book. I got a strong sense of a then versus now effect. I think the book chapters address issues that are still relevant, and there's still room for discussion about what exactly has changed, and room for discussion about, well, what should women do, for example, about their appearance, about motherhood, about their relationships with men. And the second benefit was that Neustatter mentioned, I think, just about every seminal work of feminist literature and the author. So even though I probably won't keep this book, I have photographed the bibliography because I think I will keep those pages as a potential reading list. And that's the review done. Please check out the description box. I've got the website there for Summerhill School, that very unusual, unconventional school in Suffolk. Also a YouTube video which talks about the school and interviews some of the students. And also the website from Maggie Ling, the cartoonist who did the illustrations, which I loved very much in this book. And I can't see that she's done many other pieces of work, even although I feel like I recognized her drawing as soon as I saw it. So perhaps she did more work in periodicals and newspapers way back when, and I'm having a memory dredge up from somewhere in the back of my brain. Anyway, everybody, that's it. Next thing you're going to get from me most probably is a tag video, and then I've got another fiction review lined up. And oh my goodness, I've finished books that I haven't even started reviews. I do feel like I'm reading more. I don't know what it is, but whereas I used to just keep up with my filming and editing, now I'm well ahead of myself and have things lined up waiting to be published, which I suppose is a good thing. That's not a complaint. Nope, definitely not a complaint. Okay, everybody, I hope your reading and filming and editing and all that other stuff is going well too, and I'll see you in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.